Thanks for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christina Evans. We do want to continue on with some of this week's top stories, and this may have caught your attention if you're paying close attention to the true crime world. I do want to continue on as we've been talking a little bit more about Lindsay Clancy. She's the woman who's accused of killing her 3 children, and right now she has been in the courtroom with several other folks there by her side, and those testimonies ongoing at this hour. Psychiatrists have been testifying, saying that Lindsay Clancy might not have been in the right mental state while all of this unfolded before ultimately she jumped out the window and injured herself after killing her 3 kids. And so we want to talk a little bit more about what's happening there in the courtroom and what we can also look forward to as this trial continues on. To do so, I would like to bring into the conversation now legal analyst Kelly Hyman. Kelly, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox.
Great to be with you.
All right, this again is a case that has really captured national attention as so many mothers out there, or even folks who are not mothers, just paying attention to the true crime world, heard of the fact that this woman had killed her 3 children, but also is now in court for their death, and now trying to decide whether or not she could be culpable for her actions. And so I want to ask you this: what is the central question right now that is being discussed by the courts?
The key question of this case is whether the defendant is criminally liable. And so what that means is the prosecution brings the case and the prosecution has the burden. She has been charged with murder of each one of her children. And the prosecution has to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. Now the defendant has asserted the insanity defense, that she wasn't in the state of mind to commit the crime. No from right, and know if she's criminally liable for what has happened. Now, it's interesting in Massachusetts because it's different than other states. Usually, the defendant has the burden, and what that means is if the defendants assert that they are insane, they have to prove that to the jury. However, in Massachusetts, since it's been raised, the prosecution has the burden to prove that she wasn't insane at the moment that the crime was committed, because the defendant doesn't deny the fact that she did kill her children, but denies the fact that she was planned, that it was premeditated.
And so that does make this a lot more interesting and add to what has already been a very high profile case. And so I want to ask you this, Kelly, when it comes to this psychiatric defense, how often does it work there in the courtroom? How often is a jury listening to this information able to decipher what they need to in order to see whether or not a person can be held liable for their actions?
So the juries are the triers of facts, and what that means is they will listen to the evidence and they will weigh the credibility of the person testifying. Now, this case is the battle of the experts. And why is that so important? Because each side is going to have experts that are going to testify to help support their position. So from the prosecution standpoint, they have had experts, doctors testify as to her state of mind, the defendant's state of mind. And from the prosecution standpoint, that during the time that this happened, that she was in the state of mind telling her husband to leave for 15 minutes, telling him to get food. So from the prosecution standpoint, that this was planned, premeditated. But ultimately, the jury will make a determination on who they believe.
And so I want to talk about some of the photos and videos that have also come out from this case. It was very hard to watch, and so we have viewer discretion up on the screen as well for our viewers at home as we play back some of the video. I know that evidence was heavily debated whether or not it was going to be allowed in the courtroom, but how can emotional things like that, such as 911 calls or footage that can be hard to watch, impact a jury's decision?
So from a legal standpoint, let's talk about that first. So the prosecution brings the case. They have the burden to present the evidence. And so the judge made a determination that the evidence was important for their case, important for them to prove the case. Now, these are very graphic photos of the children autopsy and also the husband's 911 call. We have to remember the husband came home. He saw his children that were killed. He saw his wife, who injured herself because it's been reported that she jumped from a window 20 feet, and he found her there and called 911. Now, the jury is supposed to listen to all the evidence, but when you have such powerful, emotional, it could potentially sway the jury to want to hold someone accountable. They have this compelling evidence, there's this compelling testimony about what happened, but the jury's supposed to just look at the evidence and just weigh it. Now, the judge did an instruction so that some of this stuff could not be played outside of the courtroom to try and limit what people heard, what happened.
And so, Kelly, as we're continuing on with this conversation, we know that the prosecution has seemingly been prepared, bringing the different types of witnesses to the stand. I also, though, want to talk about the defense's angle in all of this. You mentioned it early on. They can't deny that she committed these, killed her children. Essentially, they cannot deny that she killed her children, but they're trying to take it and frame it in the sense of the psychiatric death and how that played a role in her psychiatric state of mind. What other hurdles, though, does the defense have at this hour that they're trying to get through with this trial?
We talked about the graphicness of the evidence that the prosecution is presented. That's really powerful evidence because the burden is on the prosecution, but from the defense standpoint, people see these photos of these young, beautiful kids that are no longer living, and then hearing the 911 call. That's powerful emotion. And usually when people hear emotion, they want to hold someone accountable. They want to hold someone liable for the harm. And so when you take that, the emotion of what exactly happened, that's a burden that the defense is going to have to deal with.
And so lastly here, Kelly, I know that this is not the first time that this defense has been used. Of course, we've all heard of it. You've seen it in true crime shows. Ultimately, though, as we're looking ahead, is there anything else that sticks out to you that we should be watching for, or any other cases in the past that sort of maybe act as some precedent to what may unfold there in the courtroom?
Now, we have to remember first that each state has certain elements and certain requirements, and the defense have different elements and different requirements as well from a case. But when we look at a case that is somewhat similar, that got a lot of media attention, was a mother, Miss Yates, who killed her 5 children, drowned her 5 children, and was also asserting a mental health issue, and also the same defense here as well. Now, it's important to remember in that case, when the jury came back, they found her guilty. She went to jail because she was found guilty. Now, that jury verdict was appealed. And then after the appeal, she was retried again. Now, a second jury, after hearing the evidence, believed that the defendant, Miss Yates, was guilty by a reason of insanity. And so because it was by the reason of insanity defense that she did not go back to jail, that she is going to spend the rest of her life in a mental health institute. So if in fact the jury believed the defendant that she should not be guilty by reason of insanity, then she would spend time in a mental health facility rather than go to jail.
Once again, this is a case that's captured so much national attention. Kelly, we appreciate you for being with us here on this Saturday on Live Now from Fox. I know that we'll be back in the courtroom once those cameras are back up, and continue to track those updates until we get a verdict in this case. Thanks so much, Kelly.
Great to be with you.